Okay, we're getting back to it here. Let's go ahead and let's deal with the missing view. All right, I'm going to turn off the orthographic views, and I have one that's pre-made that I would like to import into the file, but I think doing one on our own using the technique that was shown in the handout that I gave in class would be useful. So we're going to go ahead and create one on our own. I'm going to add a mesh, and we'll add a plane. Okay, that adds one in the scene. And we're going to leave it at the defaults for right now, and then we're going to resize it. But that sort of begs the question about how are we going to resize it. So we will come in here, and we look, and the front view image that we're going to use has a size of 1513 by 558 pixels. That dimension is kind of critical to us in that it creates the correct aspect ratio for the image. What I mean by aspect ratio is if that ratio of height to width is not maintained, the image ultimately would be stretched in the viewport, and you don't want that. You wouldn't want your circles to be ellipses or anything like that. So that dimension is pretty important. And this is going to come back to the very first handout that we did in class, which was on operating systems. So if you remember, when we were doing that, I was talking to you about how to set this up. Typically, the view, when you're working in Windows, would be something more like this, where you're viewing the icons. And while this is useful for being able to see what the images contain, that sort of thing, it's not very powerful. So typically, I come in here and I set this to be details, and I will go back and forth periodically, but for the most part, I now work almost exclusively in this view because it's got so much more information. I usually sort by date modified, and that way the newest files are at the top. And the dimensions is the crucial thing. But when you first open up the Windows Explorer, that's not going to be there. So on top of setting that to view and then again details, what we would do is we'd come up to this ribbon up top, right-click on that ribbon and say more from the pick and chooser menu there. Right here we have what seems to be probably hundreds of ways to sort data inside of Windows. The one that we're interested in is dimensions. By default, this won't be sitting here at the top like that. That's really convenient because I've already turned it on. You typically would have to come in here and find it alphabetically in the list. It's not a big deal, but just make sure you turn that on because this saves a lot of steps. Normally to do this, I would have to go into a program like Photoshop and then pull up the image properties or dig for that information. I like just having it at my fingertips, so it's one of the many cool things that you can do to prep you for your files right off the bat. So now we know 1513 by 558. Okay, now that we know that, we can scale this accordingly, but we do have one issue. I'm going to go to scale here, and I'm going to grab the object, and I'll just arbitrarily start to scale it a little bit, just to kick this off. And when I do that, it opens this little history prompt window. And remember, these history prompt windows are only there during the time that you're actually using it. The moment you click off of this, it's gone for good. But right now, what we can do is we can use it. We know that the airplane was traveling down X in the red, and the wings were going in the direction of Y, which is the green. Remember, RGB XYZ. All right, so we know we want the long dimension of the image to be in the Y. So on the Y, it was 1513. But what we can do is we can move the decimal place, because if we actually did 1513 in terms of thousands, the thing would just be so gargantuan, it would be unusable. And on the other one, it was 558. So we can move the decimal place to 5.58. And then now if we zoom out a little bit, you'll see that this is the aspect ratio that we were trying to get. Okay, and right now we're set up. So now, realistically, I can scale this, and as long as I scale this uniformly, it can be any size that I want, but the aspect ratio will be correct. And now we're going to assign a material to it because something interesting is going to happen. I'm going to come in here, and once again, just like we did before, we're going to click on base color. We're going to add an image texture. We're going to go to open and go to the front view. I will open that up, and you'll see that, lo and behold, it's oriented the wrong way on the geometry. This is sometimes what we call the UV mapping coordinates of the object, and they're set to the wrong direction. I have different ways that I would fix this in various programs, but let's talk about a way we can do this within Blender that's not too terribly aggravating. What we're going to do is we're going to use the UV editor. So you'll see up here at the top, if you follow my mouse, it says up here on this tab, UV editing. I'm going to click that, and it's going to show the UV coordinates right now for this plane. If when you have these two windows side by side you're not seeing the image, just make sure you have it in hardware shade mode, because if you have it in this mode it won't look like anything. So this way you'll be able to see it. Now, just like when we're going from object to edit mode, you're going to have to enable the UV editing inside of here. So I'm going to click that little arrow icon, and now we're in the UV editor. And I'm going to come in here, and one of the things that I'm going to enable in here is constrained to image bounds. Okay, so I'm going to enable that, and you'll see now it's checked. So now I can come in here and I can select the points and I can move them. And even though I'm going to be moving this point here, I want you to watch what it does over here on the right. So I'm going to start moving that, and if you keep watching on the right, you'll see that it's distorting the image because this is changing the area that's getting mapped onto that geometry. So basically what we have to do is we have to pretend to rotate this. And what I mean is we'll just move all the points one corner over clockwise, and it'll change it from being horizontal to vertical or vice versa. And we have it constrained to live within the limits of the image so it's easy to locate. So there you go. I moved all the points. I took this point, moved it here, took this original point, moved it here, took this point, moved it there, and so on. So we've effectively rotated it all, and now you can see now the image is oriented correctly on the geometry. And one more time, just to see again what this does, I'll grab two of them, and you can see when I modify these, it stretches. And now if you look on the left, you'll see I'm going to put the area right through that little circle here on there. And now you can sort of see how that relates to what's going on. So that red line on the left correlates to where that stops. So eventually when we get to texturing objects, we're going to be using the UV editor a lot. So now that we've got that properly rotated, we will go back to layout and that view will disappear. Right now, it looks as though we've got this oriented the wrong way, and that's okay, we're going to rotate it anyway. So let's go ahead and rotate this up. Remember, hold Control, and that way you can see if you nailed the 90 degree. If you don't, you can look down here in that little history window. Make sure to rotate it 90 before you get out of there, because you don't want to have that at a funny angle. Now let's turn the orthographic views back on, and you'll see that we've imported that image. Now I'm going to move it forward. I like having this particular image actually, I like having it sort of in line with the peaks of the wings. And now we can uniformly scale this up to try to match what's going on here on the image. And remember, we can hold Shift to sort of make that fit a little better. And you'll notice our image isn't quite perfectly across there, so we're going to wind up having to move this a little bit. So it's not the end of the world or anything. Again, blueprints are not exactly perfect, and you'll see that right here the top of the barrel in the front view is really close to matching the barrel and the side view image. Whereas down here, if we look, and we can't see through it right now because we haven't done that trick to reduce the opacity of the image. So let's go in and fix that. Remember I mentioned here we're going to crank down specular, we're going to crank down roughness, we're going to crank down index of refraction, okay, and then transmission if you had any. We don't have any. All right, then we're going to change the alpha to 0.2, and then from alpha to 0.2, we're going to come in here and we're going to set the blend mode to alpha blend. All right, and then now that is set up so that it's correct. And there you have it. All right, so we've got that set up, and that'll help us be able to see both things at the same time. So now we can see that it's correct up top, but it's really too big down at the bottom. We need to scale this down just a little bit. And so I will come in and scale it. And again, I'll sort of, be careful about doing it. I don't want to go too crazy. And then I will move it up a bit to accommodate. And now you'll see that we're pretty much, now if I trace this line to see where it intersects, We're doing really well. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is more about learning to model than it is about pixel perfect accuracy. So there we go. We've got it right at the wingtips. Maybe we could move it back a smidge like that. We have it oriented and sized to the barrel. We uniformly scaled it. Remember, anytime you scale it, make sure it's uniform so that you don't lose the aspect ratio. And that's doing great. We're going to double click this, name this front view. All right. And then we're going to assign that to the orthographic view collection. So there we go. And then we can turn them all on and off, or we can do them individually by expanding that menu and then doing them one at a time. All right. And then I would also like to talk about the other way of bringing these in. So now that we did that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, after all that work, delete that. But now instead, let's import a file. Inside of Blender, if I wanted to do a file import, I go import, and you'll see there's all of these different types of files that you can import. Not anywhere on this list is a .blend file, and that's because it handles Blender files differently. Let me cover these real quickly. There's an open source Collada. That was a file format that was created to help people transferring indie game developer stuff back and forth. I don't know if it's picked up a lot of steam. I saw it a few years ago. We don't really use it. There's Alembic. Okay, that's one that I don't know anybody who uses that one. I'm sure it's useful. I can't tell you why. There's motion capture BVH. This one is important if you're doing character motion capture. This is more of an animation format. It's not a geometry format. We have SVG, so that's importing vectors like that math-based, you know, like a pen tool or Illustrator tool. That's for bringing in the open source version of that, which is called an SVG, but that would be 2D graphics. There's a PLY. PLY, sometimes I use that format for large data sets like point clouds and that, but I don't really use it for transferring geometry. There's STL, which is the stereolithography format. That's the format typically you'd be working in if you're going to be doing 3D printing, which that's not an issue right now. Then there's Filmbox, FBX. FBX is the Autodesk proprietary format, which surprises me that it's in there. I would have thought they'd have to pay for that, but I guess maybe not. There's this one here, this GITF. I have absolutely no idea what that is. I'm not going to lie to you. And then there's Wavefront OBJ. This is probably the most universal Polygon format that you can use to transfer data back and forth. You'll see me use this extensively. And then lastly, there's the WRL files, which again I would use sometimes with point clouds and that, but not something I'd use here. So from this list, really the only thing I might use is STL, FBX, and OBJ. That's it. The rest of these, just so you know what they are, I've listed them out. But realistically, those are the ones that we would do. But Blender's not on there. So how do we do it? What we do instead is we go to Append. Append is sort of like saying we're going to bring stuff in from a Blender file, and then you'll be able to pick what it is. I'm going to come in here and I have this front view file that I had, and I'm going to go to Append, and you'll see it doesn't do anything. It just immediately takes you into the subfolders that are associated with that particular file. Brushes, collections, freestyle lines, images, materials, meshes, objects, palette scene, so on and so forth. I could come into collection, and inside of collection I could bring in the default collection, but that's going to bring a bunch of stuff I don't want. If I go to object though, you'll see front view is living here, and this is the way that we can import just that particular object, and we'll have it now inside of the view. And right now it's out of position a little bit, but that's all we got to do is bring it in and move it to where we wanted it, and then we're good to go. And right now it's called front view just like it was before. We're going to make that part of the correct collection, and there you go. Now we have brought that image file in as an import, and I also showed you how to do one on your own if you had to, and then this way you'll have both methods that you'll be able to lean on as you need. Okay, that'll do it for this video. We'll see you again on the next one.